know racism when I see it.
Joining us now from Washington is Jessica Stone. She is the author of Crossing the Divide. And Jessica, let me just ask this basic question, because I started the segment this way. Are we becoming a nation of sore losers?
We are a nation that is more divided than ever through the pandemic and through technology. And I think that in the last year, you and I haven't seen each other in person in almost a year. That has gotten worse. And I know you're specifically talking about the those who lost the election and how that led into and played into the events of January 6th. But I think it is amplified in a way that it wasn't 4 years ago or even during Bush v. Gore. If we had had the same set of circumstances in terms of stovepiped social media, of pandemic isolation, you do have to wonder how much more easily conspiracy theories could have taken place.
But there have always been conspiracy theories. I remember after September 11th, there was, I think, the movie Loose Parts going across the internet. And everybody was saying, look at this, look at this, look at this. And even in the 60s, there were conspiracy theories. Why is it that we just, I hate to quote Rodney King, but why is it we just can't get along? I mean, you're right. After Bush v. Gore, nobody was happy on the Democratic side, especially after Gore conceded defeat, and the Republicans were celebrating. And then the Democrats really celebrated the entire Bush presidency, saying, look what he did in Iraq. But after Hillary Clinton lost, she conceded. We have yet to hear from Donald Trump saying that he has conceded, and in fact, we never will hear from him saying that. Why is it we just can't do this anymore? What changed?
Well, I think Donald Trump is an anomaly in the sense that he is an anomaly of an elected leader and an anomaly in the sense of the level of narcissism and psychopathy that this leader had and has. He is unwilling and incapable, it would seem, of doing just that, of conceding. And I don't think we look at him as either a model or a someone that we're likely to see again in Democratic or Republican politics from that perspective. I think our country is looking for something different. They do like candidates that upset the apple cart, but maybe not quite this much.
I was watching John Danforth. I covered his campaign. He was a throwback to the old days when politicians actually wanted to engage. It wasn't politics by polls. And he was saying that he now distances himself and says that the worst decision he ever made was recommending Josh Hawley. It is fascinating to me that Hawley has not said anything in the way of contrition, even though both the Kansas City Star and the Times have come out saying that he should resign. How do we can talk about Donald Trump all we want, but it's not just Donald Trump. It's Ted Cruz.
I think it's a really good point you're bringing up. And if I could jump in to help you make it, one of the fascinating
and I'm so glad you do, because I'm terrible at this.
Terrible. Not at all. No, I think what I want to communicate is that, I've written this book about cross-cultural competency, right? And those are the skills that help you get along anywhere with anyone, whether it's inside the country or outside the country. And it is something that we haven't done in Washington. And here's why. We no longer have men and women who serve in Congress living in Washington, D.C., either because of financial reasons or because their political party affiliation wants them in the district. What does that mean? Their kids don't go to school together. Their wives don't go to parties together. They don't take anybody in their family to parties together. They don't see each other at the local dining room or the local McDonald's. They are not living life together, and therefore they're seeing each other in light of ideology and party affiliation, and not in the fact that we're all people, and they indeed are people. There's also division, much more divisive rhetoric on both sides, where one side is painting the other as racist, the other is painting the other side as socialist, and never the twain shall meet. There is no longer a culture of reaching across the aisle. And I'm not saying anything new, right? But here's the difference, I would argue. We have, and dark money, we shouldn't forget dark money in politics. No more transparency in corporate donations. Corporations are people, Mitt Romney said. They're funding candidates, and we don't know how these candidates are being funded, so we don't have transparency in who's got influence over them. But I want to get back to this point about cross-cultural competency skills. There is no motivation to do that if you're not seeing each other regularly, if you're not communicating. I mean, it goes back to something Martin Luther King Jr. said. People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. How do you and I have such a great working relationship and we completely disagree on so many things? Because we respect each other. We value each other. That is what the Constitution told us we're supposed to be doing as human beings and as Americans. And we're not doing it. We're treating people like they are simply a bunch of ideas or a bunch of votes, not like they're human beings.
When we come back, I have a theory, and I want to see if you think it's true. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
We can do better and deserve so much more.
No racism when I see it.
Continuing our conversation now with Jessica Stone. She is the author of Crossing the Divide. And Jessica, something interesting happened in Georgia. And it wasn't that the Democrats won. It's that both sides poured a boatload of money into an economically depressed state. And neither one of them reached out to the people and said, I'd rather put a chicken in every pot than a commercial on every television station. But it seemed in the end, nobody was paying attention to the money. They were paying attention to the candidates themselves, which is a unique idea. Did you see Georgia that way, or do you think it was a Democrat versus Republican thing?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack in Georgia. And I think your reference to money is interesting, right? Obviously, Georgia was carved up as a turkey, Thanksgiving turkey. I really do think that it became a battle for party supremacy in Washington. And I don't think it was about the people. Let's face it, Kelly Loeffler was not a strong Republican candidate. She does not embody a lot of the ideals that at least the more conservative and traditional wing of the party upholds. And she's not a strong spokesperson with a clean record. And so I think it's of little surprise that she couldn't be propped up with all of that money. But in particular, when the battle was really not over whether she was the best elected representative or her competitor, Raphael Warnock, that she lost, because it was about which team is going to win. That is how I see Georgia. I don't see it as a bunch of individuals, and I don't think that we covered in the media it as anything but a power, the sort of the ultimate test of who would be in power in Washington.
Do you think that we have gotten it wrong now as members of the media? And I know it's easy to beat ourselves up because everybody else does as well. But I know yeah, that's true. When I worked for another network, they had a philosophy and they said, we will not cover politics as a horse race. We will cover it as two candidates, and we will cover the issues that they espouse, but not what the latest polls say, because they say the polls are a snapshot in time. Are we becoming part of the national nightmare by always covering things in terms of the left, the right, the polls, who's winning, who's losing,
Yeah, why should we be surprised that character doesn't matter to voters anymore when we don't care about it in the media? We're not covering people in that light. We're not talking about their values and what their policies would do to those values, how they would either promote them or reject them. I mean, there's a battle of values going on in this country, not just in the diversity of race, religion, but also one of thought. I mean, we've talked about before that that church life and religion shapes a lot of traditional values. And I really have to point out that the people with traditional values in this country do not feel heard. You know what it feels like not to be heard as a member of a minority group. I know what it feels like to feel unheard as a woman and as a person of Jewish ancestry. You don't want to do that to somebody else. And yet here we are doing it again. We are marginalizing people whose values are legitimate, but we are saying that they are not. And this is resulting in a complete cancel culture that I would argue is modern day segregation.
When we come back, what happened to the church? Stay with us.
We can do better and deserve so much more.
I know racism when I see it.
You raised it. I'm going to go there. Throughout this entire 4 years, 5 years actually, and even the insurrection on Capitol Hill, I have not heard the nation's ministers come out one way or the other and say anything. And I find it striking, and I know I'm going to get, texts from everybody saying, but so-and-so and so-and-so said such and such the thing. But the mainstream ministers, the ones that the nation, leans on for moral authority, are quiet. Crickets. Your thoughts?
I think there's a reckoning in the church, and there needs to be one. There was this narrative during the Trump presidency that you could support someone without morality or a character, as some argued. He doesn't have either. Certainly, we know that factually there are examples that that's the case. But there was an argument that it would be worth it if he supported conservative and Christian, Judeo-Christian values. I think that has to be re-examined. I think it is being re-examined. I can't recall his name, but there was a Dallas pastor in particular who recently apologized for carrying the water of that narrative. Vox and Vice News have done this special on how the narrative of Cyrus was used to justify these kinds of ideas. And while I'm not extremely familiar with all of the theological underpinnings of it, I think, this sort of means to an end for some members of the Christian community was definitely an argument that they made in support of Donald Trump. I think what we're seeing now is what does that say about those who and the character of those who supported this previous president? And what does it say about those who supported the man of Joe Biden and the woman of Kamala Harris as their new leaders? When the first Sunday, we see the president of the United States going back to church. We see that he's on the membership rolls at the Catholic Church that he previously attended when he was vice president. And we see him talking about his faith as a motivator for his policies and his politics. Look, I mean, there's plenty of room for disagreement about policy within and without the church. But I definitely think that the church and people in the church are wrestling with how much should a church endorse a candidate? How much and from what vantage point? I mean, I think that's something that pastors in particular in this last year have really wrestled with. There's been some good writing by the Wall Street Journal on how divisive it's been in some congregations. So I do think there's a national reckoning going on in the Christian community and particularly in the evangelical Christian community. And that's, we have awakenings periodically when we go the wrong way and we're subject to redirection, and we have to ask forgiveness. That's a tenet of the Christian faith, and I don't see any reason why those in leadership in churches across America should be any different.
When we come back, Frankenstein's monster. Stay with us.
We can do better and deserve so much more.
No racism when I see it.
We continue our conversation now with Jessica Stone. She's the author of Crossing the Divide. And Jessica, have we created Frankenstein's monster? And I bring this up because you and I have worked in the business long enough to remember when politicians were the people that knocked on the door and actually wanted us to interview them. Now they want to know what your viewership is on your network, whether it's Fox or whether it's BNC or whether it's CNN or MSNBC. The truth of the matter is they used to actually work for us. Now they work for corporations that want them to do their bidding, and they spend more time trying to get donations than they do talking about the things that they believe or don't believe. And in fact, it's a well-known fact in Washington, the easiest way to keep an issue alive is not to take a position, to always keep it on the table. Is it time that journalistic institutions start to actually book guests that know what they're talking about versus guests that are against one person or for another person?
Are you talking about the end of clickbait? Because I think that's kind of where we're headed if we go that route. And I would say, my vantage point is clickbait and the tenets of clickbait don't support good journalism. We're going for the lowest common denominator when we do that, and we're not empowering politicians to be flawed people with different policies, with the ability to evolve.
They don't. You never hear a politician say I was wrong, and everybody.
They're not allowed to be wrong.
Right.
They're either detractors or, and the reality is it's okay to be wrong. Admit it, ask forgiveness if you need to, and change your course of path. That's humanity. That's and I don't think that means that we go any easier on them as reporters. We need to hold the powerful accountable. But once we've beaten them over the head with the fact that they're wrong, if in fact they are, give them a chance to respond. And it does say a lot more about their character, going back to what you were saying about the lack of concession from our previous president. The character of the person is evident to all. We don't have to point it out. It's obvious.
I began this segment by taking a look at football and watching two teams beat the crap out of each other for 4 quarters, or even boxers. They beat the crap out of themselves for 9 rounds or 12 rounds. And then at the end, they hug, they make up. And I mean, this is physical, hand-to-hand combat. But at the end of every game, they do their introspection, but they hug. You watch hockey players, they don't have teeth. At the end of the game, they're shaking hands, blood all over their faces. Politics has become a blood sport, but they need to take an example from people that really do blood sports.
Actually, I wanted to raise something that I missed an opportunity to say earlier about the parallels I'm seeing between the set of cross-cultural skills that you need to have to get along in a diverse environment globally, and how those skills translate. I want to be clear. I think we're going to see people ask for that. I think that we are going to see more people in the national dialogue and the national conversation ask for, hey, listen, as opposed to having he said, she said, for lack of a better construct on cable TV, let's have a longer, more nuanced discussion. And let's acknowledge that truth is absolute, but it looks different to different people. And that's okay. And let's talk it out. Let's have a period of discovery together. What I think is really interesting is I've recently become aware that somebody who's been involved in cross-cultural training is going to be taking that cross-cultural training effort to the Hill to work with politicians. Is it a new philosophy that they can't get along and there needs to be more bipartisanship? By no means. But just the experiences that both you and I have had traveling this country and others, and taking the time to listen, taking the time to find common ground. We have to give our politicians the space to do that. And in the media, we need to give people the space to do that. And it's okay to hold them accountable for what they've said. And we don't have to be so ugly about it, like people are fallible. I mean, are you and I perfect? I mean, you might be, Del, but
yes.
I mean, let's let people be people. And again, that doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable in the media, but I'm really going to be fascinated to see what happens with a national call for this. We obviously are having a national time of reckoning over diversity and inclusion. Let's make sure it doesn't just go to having the right labels in office on people's race, religion, ethnicity, or gender, or sexual orientation. Let's make sure we have a diversity of thought. Let's make sure that we give people space to be who they are and to have differences of opinion in a healthy way. That is what makes our country unique, is that we can continue to get better and grow back better. The president of the United States calls it building back better. I think I saw in the White House Twitter feed, it was bark back better because his dogs were barking in the background. But let's build back better. Take the hint from the universe, from God, whatever, and let's build back better.
The best way to do it is to buy a book called Crossing the Divide by one Jessica Stone, because you speak from years of experience actually listening to people. And I think maybe you might have hit on something right there just by saying listen. And every once in a while, we're going to get it wrong.
What does your book say? You got 2 of these. And one of these, right? It's pretty simple.
My mom said these two didn't work and this one needed to be quiet. Jessica, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
We can do better and deserve so much more.